Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Anacortes City Council meeting of February 5th, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciak, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Fantini.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall. Ms. Hubick. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
I move we excuse the absence of Ms. Hubick, who had a death in the family, and Mr. McDougall, who is traveling for work.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Mr. Young to excuse Ms. Hubick and Mr. McDougall. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? A motion carries. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, first up we have announcements and committee reports. I've got a couple of announcements. First announcement, this Thursday, February 8th, is the Anacortes Family Center's 10th annual Dine-In, Shop, to End Homelessness, with 31 restaurants and businesses participating. Anacortes Family Center is a contracted and trusted partner with the City of Anacortes, providing social and housing services for our community. So if you're inclined to go out and support our local businesses, which you should all the time, Thursday would be a particularly good day to do so. So more info can be found at anacortesfamilycenter.org. Next Saturday, February the 17th, the Anacortes Library will host Adventure Day from 2 to 7 p.m. This will be the 7th annual and very popular Genre Fest. Costumes, games, treats, prizes for all ages. All right, so those were the fun ones. The last announcement I have is R Avenue and R Avenue improvements, and you see we've got a little slide up. So we're very close to wrapping up this very significant road and sidewalk construction project. As I've said a number of times, this is not just about a roundabout at R and 30th, but multiple intersections in the R Avenue corridor as a whole. Even bioswales, multiple bioswales, and I didn't do the math. I know there are 9 bioswales to go, and we're 90% done on bioswales. So somebody could probably help me out with that math and figure out how many bioswales are in there. So that's good for improving our runoff. However, it's going to be a little more difficult and inconvenient starting today. I believe a matter of a few hours ago, the R and 34th Street, that final intersection is going to get its turn under the knife of heavy equipment. This will allow only for inbound northbound traffic from State Route 20 to R onto the T Avenue detour, as you can see in that picture, that red line. So you'll be able to come in. You'll be able to come in that way, but there will no longer be an outlet from 34 to R to State Route 20. So if you're coming westbound on 34th Street, you will not be able to turn left onto R Avenue and get out on State Route 20 that way. This will obviously push a lot more traffic to Commercial Avenue, including some of those big green and white double semis. So if at all possible, try to avoid peak traffic. And if the weather cooperates for paving, we expect to be completely open the first week of March. So again, the city appreciates everyone's patience making this significant progress of improving our streets. But we have a couple of more weeks of pain points to go. But again, this is a major project, and we'll get through it as soon as possible. Okay, so that's it for my announcements. And I know you're getting ready to come up, but we'll do that public comment is when we'll get to the special event Earth Day celebration. So you can relax if those are really heavy. Okay. Next up, 3A Fiber Committee report.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
The Fiber Committee met on January 24th. The Fiber Committee consists of myself, Bruce McDougall, and Amanda Hubick. I don't know who was present at the meeting. I wasn't, but I have notes. The citywide fiber take rate is now 48%. That's up several percentage points, and we're pretty pleased about that because, as you might recall, our original business model on which we launched this project estimated that we needed 35% for cost recovery, so 48% is quite a bit better. We are installing our new router. We had a router as a single point of failure in the system, and we did have some trouble with that router, which we've worked around, but now we have a second router that will function as a backup. It will take us several weeks to get installed and up to speed, but then we will be able to perform maintenance on the first router. So that's definitely an expense that was well worth it to make sure that we have the reliability and redundancy that we advertise with this service. The RFP bid opening for the EDA area, one of our last remaining areas in the city to cover with fiber deployment, was to be January 31st, and that's what was scheduled as of this meeting that was January 24th, but I believe that was extended, so I don't know that bid opening has occurred yet on that. We are more or less done with Summit X's work in the Guimas View area, and staff are processing some review for final acceptance of their work. And I think that largely covers what the committee discussed in my absence 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that bid opening slid to hopefully Wednesday this week, so that is correct info. Next up is 3B, Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. The HACS committee met on Thursday, February 1st. Our meetings have changed to Thursdays at 9 a.m. and they are open to the public, mostly via Zoom, Teams. So now those are Thursdays at 9 instead of Wednesdays at 9. We had Nicole Johnston from Parks in, and because we're trying to figure out all of the different ways that people who don't have houses can be housed even temporarily. So it turns out there are parks vouchers through a couple of local organizations like churches and the Anacortes Family Center, where people, if they sort of get vetted a little bit, and then they can camp at Washington Park for up to 14 days, like any resident or visitor can. So that's a good option for people at times. And Stephanie Snyder, who works in the planning department, has been working on a service matrix of who does what providers do, and what resources are available through them. Basically, so we can understand as a committee and our staff can understand where the funding is coming from for these different initiatives and programs, where the gaps are, and more so we can understand how that all works together so we can have a better system. There are some self-help resources for people. There's a booklet that gets handed out, and there are resources on the various service websites as well. So that information is pretty widely accessible to people, both in physical form if they don't have computer access, and also online. So we talked about the North Star project a little bit, and vital conditions, and just various things that's under that rubric, and understanding that better. They're giving us occasional updates, and that's the countywide initiative to better coordinate services as well. They have a new database system that the county's been using, and our staff just got access to that last week. So it's a way that the agencies can communicate with each other. And we're also talked about the privacy that's necessary within the framework of the organizations talking with each other, but how they can best help people and respect their privacy at the same time. And that was pretty much it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next up is 3C, Public Works Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
The Public Works Committee, Ms. Moulton, Mr. Young, and myself met just before this meeting. We talked about a number of items, and let me give you a rundown of some of the notable ones. There are some agenda items on tonight's meeting that I won't cover. One of the primary items we discussed was the South Commercial Avenue Complete Streets Project Phase 1, which is more colloquially known as the 12th and Commercial Roundabout project. It's a little bit larger than that, but that's certainly the most important feature. We need to continue to move on that project because we have a deadline of August by which we will lose some of the money that we have received for that project if we don't have it bid out by then. Right-of-way remains the primary issue because we need slightly more right-of-way than WashDOT has for us to complete the roundabout in that location. The roundabout is designed to make truck turning movements easy, but that also means that they need slightly more room. We repeated that in addition to resolving the roundabout issue, and we had some suggestions for that, that we must have a solution to the Safeway stacking problem. And we discussed potentially an option of closing the leg of the roundabout that would enter Safeway, leaving the leg exiting Safeway for the roundabout. But that would help mitigate the effect of people stacking up in front of the Safeway entrance. Today, it is a problem, but tomorrow, where there is a steady stream of traffic coming from a roundabout instead of a signalized intersection, we worry that that stacking could end up inside the roundabout itself. So we asked Public Works to analyze that and have very clear answers to those questions when they come forward to the City Council with further discussion of the final roundabout design. We've authorized them to go to 100% design, but we reiterated that from our perspective as City Council members, we do not have 100% design if we don't have answers to those questions. We also talked about safe routes to schools. Apparently the school district has identified a few areas that they would like some traffic adjustments made. They will bring those suggestions to the Public Works Committee, sitting as the Traffic Safety Committee, to hack through those suggestions, and then they will come to full City Council for review. We talked a little bit about the school districts and the city's Joint Operations Center. The city is doing a master plan for facilities during this year, but also a master plan for the ops facility. And that plan will likely expand the city's footprint there, and there may not be room for the school district. We reiterated that we perceive that to be a multiple year process, not anything that should happen anytime soon. We talked a little bit about our service to the city of Oak Harbor, our water service to the city of Oak Harbor. There are currently 2 pipes serving Oak Harbor from our water system. One is our pipe, the other belongs to the city. We are going to be replacing our pipe because it is in need of it. It's from 1950 or whatever. Oak Harbor had some concern about that. They thought maybe they might want to get by with 1 pipe, but we are going to replace our pipe and make sure that we can provide water through the pipe that is part of our system, and the committee was supportive of that. We also talked about, as was raised at public comment a couple of weeks ago, the RFQ that the city put out for FEMA grants portal management and environmental permitting. The legal notice that appeared in the paper talked about asking for qualifications for firms that could do FEMA grant reporting and other features related to FEMA funding. And then it listed a number of FEMA funded projects, including Guimas Channel Trail revetment repair. And so what we understand from Public Works is these are all FEMA funded projects. We need specialized assistance to properly do the reporting for FEMA reimbursement. And FEMA requires us to do procurement on the firm that would provide those services. We're not allowed to select a firm without doing procurement that's consistent with FEMA regs. So that's why we were doing that, and that answers hopefully some of the questions that were raised here at public comment a couple weeks ago. Then finally, we had identified AMC Chapter 1524 engineering and development service fees. It's a very old chapter of our code in a title of the code that we have been working on deleting for quite some time, Title 15. There's not very much left in that title. But these are old, archaic fees, $20 for street cuts and those kinds of things. And so what we recommended to Public Works is that they bring forward a resolution to add those fees to the unified fee schedule and an amendment, a code amendment to delete that chapter entirely from the code. That concludes the Public Works Committee. I also met today with the North Star Project Housing Work Group. Several planning directors and representatives from Skagit County on the public housing question related to the North Star project. They continued their discussion of what public properties are available for housing development countywide. The group is going to whittle down their list for each jurisdiction. Our list is Sharps Corner and the Habitat Project on West 5th Street. But the other jurisdictions have more options that they've identified for more projects on more parcels, and they're going to whittle that list down before bringing it forward to the North Star Leadership Committee, which is the city mayors and the county commissioners, or one county commissioner. And then finally, we discussed potential grant opportunity, the Connecting Low-Income Housing planning grant through the Department of Commerce. It's only $25,000, but it might be something that the county might go after. I said the city would be happy to take any $25,000 checks that they would like to write us.
Okay, thanks. Any other committee reports that we may have missed? Okay, I'm going to move on to item 3D, which is Housing Authority Board appointment, and I'm glad to see many members of the Housing Authority Board here tonight. And I would like to thank Tana Baker, who completed her term on the Housing Authority Board, and appreciate her service there. And although we believe in the code, it's not required for council confirmation. I think it would be just fine if council would take my recommendation that the following appointment to the Housing Authority Board be confirmed, and that would be Pat Barrett for a term of 5 years, effective through December 31st, 2028.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
I move to confirm the appointment of Pat Barrett to the Housing Authority Board as presented.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Mr. Fantini to confirm Pat Barrett to the Housing Authority Board. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you for that, and thanks again for all the work that the board does, and recognize Ms. Rooks for being here, and the rest of the board members that are here. Next up is the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission. These are reappointments, and the reappointments for this, it's my recommendation that the following reappointments to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission be confirmed by council, and they are Alex Hernandez and Christine Hansen, and this would be through second term through December 31st, 2028.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
I move we approve the recommendations as presented. Thank you. Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. Fantini to approve the reappointments for Alex Hernandez and Christine Hansen to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Okay, one more, maybe it's two more. I think it's two more appointments. I had the names right in front of me, Stephen Chang and Trish Wilson. Okay, again, Stephen Chang appointed for a 3-year term through it is my recommendation that council confirms the appointment of Stephen Chang for a 3-year term through December 31st, 2026, and Trish Wilson, 3-year term, December 31st, 2026. Again, the information is in your packet.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Fantini.
I move that Stephen Chang and Trish Wilson be appointed to the Anacortes Arts Commission as presented.
Second.
Simultaneous second. Motion by Mr. Fantina, a second by Ms. Moulton to approve the appointments of Stephen Chang and Trish Wilson to the Anacortes Arts Commission. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Again, thank you, and I appreciate all the members of the community willing to serve in these roles. We cannot do the work of the city without that help, so appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to move on to item 4, public comment. There was one written public comment. You should have received that either by email or in the packet from Ms. Call. Before we move to the consent agenda, because we have some guests here with some very large and very interesting things here, I would like to allow them to come up and talk about, it's on the consent agenda, item 5D, which is special event, Anacortes Earth Day celebration. So, Ms. Flynn, are you going to do the, okay, come on up to the microphone and we'll let you do your show. And yep. Can you make sure the microphone's on? The little square button on the microphone itself, on the base.
Testing.
There you go.
Okay, all right. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We appreciate the opportunity to introduce ourselves and tell you a little bit about what we're planning in the way of the Anacortes Earth Day celebration on April 20th. My name is Peggy Flynn. I live here in town, and with me are some of the folks who are involved in putting this production on. And I'll explain it. It's going to take part in 3 different elements. The first element is going to be called the Procession of the Species. You've actually seen it here in the community over a couple of years, and we have Lori Sherman pretending to be an elephant and Andy Stewart, a giraffe. So you'll see a lot more of this kind of thing on the afternoon of April 20th around 5 o'clock on Commercial Avenue. Following that, a little later, will be the Luminary Light Parade, which Loa Linda Bird of the Paper Bird Studios on Guimas, she's the creative energy and genius behind these beautiful luminaries. So the Luminary Parade would be a second element, and it starts, here's what happens. The procession starts in the daytime, but the Luminary Parade needs to be at night because it's dark. So filling in that between time, the Downtown Anacortes Alliance, which Jordan isn't here, but Jordan and her group have enthusiastically jumped on board to create a street fair festival environment. And so they're working with the downtown restaurants and businesses and the nonprofits and environmental groups, and there's just going to be a brand new street fair that'll take place from about 6 to 8, and then we'll have the Luminary Parade. So those are the 3 elements, and I want to tell you what our goals are. They're to promote civic engagement, to be fun and provide inspiration, to stimulate creativity in the community, to offer our locals and our tourists a unique new experience that supports our downtown businesses. And we want to include every organization in this community that wants to be a part of it. And we've already reached out to quite a few. I'll give you a quick list. We haven't reached out to all, but these are part of who we're reaching out to. The Anacortes Arts Festival, the Chamber of Commerce, the school districts, the Anacortes Forest Lands and Friends of the Forest, the museum, the library, Parks and Rec, the Anacortes Rotary Club, Fidalgo Dance Works, AMP, Anacortes Pride, the Waterfront Alliance, Deception Pass State Park. I can go on. It's really any organization in the community that wants to be a part of this. We see it as a new shoulder season event that will happen every year. So we're here to answer questions if you have them.
Okay, any questions? Again, it's the
Mayor
street fair.
Miller?
Mr. Young.
I have been a fan of this project and work for quite a while, and I'm just so delighted to hear that you guys are really mushrooming, if you would, your effort here in Anacortes. You know, I've seen, I think I was sort of teasing with you a little bit in the back about seeing it in the other city, Mount whatever it is, and just so delighted in the success there, but also loving the fact that you guys are bringing it here and you're involving so much. So all I can say to that is bravo. I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Fantini.
When I was at that meeting when you guys were all, where everyone was discussing it, and there was a part where you had talked about kind of the in-between space was going to be filled with some of the actual construction of some of the items. Are you still planning on doing that, or?
We're classes?
Yeah.
I'll be teaching at Buxton's. I've already contacted the library about working with little people, and I am teaching in my studio.
Great.
And then I'll bring a lot more luminaries.
Sounds fantastic.
And the procession will also be doing workshops.
Thank you.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. I just want to say I love the multi-dimensionality of this, the way it's growing, and you're involving the local businesses and the other clubs, and it just sounds so much fun on so many different levels. So great job. Thank you. It's going to be a great contribution to our community.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And again, council, you see that on our consent agenda. What we were trying to figure out how to name it, a street fair application, but we got it on there as the Anacortes Earth Day celebration, but it obviously encompasses all that stuff, so that's great. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, so I've got some folks who have signed up for public comment as well, and Teresa Baker, city website is the subject. And again, if you could state your name and what city you live in, just for our record, to make sure we get it down.
Teresa Baker, Anacortes, Mayor, Council. I'm just here because this past week I was trying to help someone who's new to the community find out what ward they were in and who their representative was. And so we went online, and I found the experience not very helpful. First of all, the map is hard to read of where the words are, and she had no idea where she fit on that map, and I didn't quite know either. And then looking at the website, I'm not a tech person. I don't go online generally, so I thought it was just me, but she's very techy, and she said, no, it's not user-friendly, and it seemed to me like it hadn't been updated in a couple years. So I don't know who runs your website, but it isn't user-friendly. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And that does remind me of the R Avenue announcement that should be on our front page under news items with that map that is up there as well for the detour. Okay, next up is Allen Rhodes. Public event space is the topic. As soon as the light comes on.
There we go.
There.
Okay. Mayor and council members, Anacortes needs a public event space. I'm appalled by the actions, or better said, inactions of the City of Anacortes Planning Department, City Council, the Mayor, Port of Anacortes staff, Port Executive Director, and Port Commission members. The inability of these organizations to work together has created an economic and social void in our community by allowing the Port's transit shed to close without a replacement or a replacement plan. The community is feeling the impact of canceled events while watching the flailing attempts of our city government to recover from their inaction. However, I understand that a joint city-port plan has been developed and will be presented at a joint committee meeting tomorrow. It is imperative that this plan be vetted and implemented as soon as possible. Additionally, the Port's Northwest Basin Redevelopment Plan, which is in the Planning Department for approval now, must be moved forward expeditiously. I hope that everyone in this room understands how important a community event space is, both culturally and financially. It is imperative that the mayor understand the urgency required to approve and complete the proposed plan. The position of, quote, whoever gets there first wins, unquote, is not the leadership that is needed. The current and previous administrations have allowed this travesty to develop. To think that the developer of the Fidalgo Landing project, who the city has held at arm's length for decades, would be willing and able to solve this situation is absurd. Unfortunately, the damage has been done for 2024, as most nonprofits and other potential users of a public event space have either canceled events or have found other suitable locations. I worry about 2025 and beyond until the new proposal is built. It's about time that our elected officials and staff from the city and the port step up and do their jobs in order to support the needs of our community. This public event space is super important, and it's a void in our community right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have anybody else signed up for public comment. Anybody here in the chambers wish to address the council? Anything I forgot to say, anything that's not on our agenda, but I think, yep. Okay, I will move on to item 5, which is our consent agenda, items A through D. Council.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Young.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, another simultaneous second. A motion by Mr. Young and a second by Mr. Fantini to approve consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion carries. We are on to item 6, which is other business. First up is ordinance 4068, amending the 2023 budget. This is a discussion item with possible action and open for public comment. Mr. Hoagland, you
Thank
are
you, Mayor.
on.
Members of the council, members of the audience, bear with me as I navigate to this material. So there is a budget amendment, an amending ordinance for your consideration. I do have a little background information I'd like to go through, though, just real briefly. This is material that council has seen before, just updated to figures through the end of the year now. So this is that overall all tax chart that just gives a brief overview of all of our major tax streams. Property tax, and looking at December, the metric as we're going through the year, generally I'll establish what that is and then compare it to what we've collected, in a percentage format. So if you drop down to the bottom line, our major tax revenue streams were right, just slightly over 100% collection, which is great. But looking down the line here, we'll look at each of these in a little more detail. The only one that really pops out is utility taxes. That's a little bit under what we had projected for budget. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a minute. Did want to touch on sales tax real quick. This is our one of our most important revenue streams. If you down at the bottom of this December column here, the very bottom number, this 0.1%, that's the amount of collection above what we collected in the previous year. So just a few thousand more than what we collected last year. Looking at the top numbers here, the blue is what we had budgeted, 5.9 million. The red is the actual receipts of 6 million. So just 2.2% over what we had budgeted. So looking the next page down, this is just a view of the trend over the last several years. You can see what total collections have been since 2016, and with nice kind of general growth over most of that period until this year, which is pretty much flat compared to last year. This is the utility tax. So there's two components of utility tax. Public utility tax is the utility tax charged against the city's utilities, the public utilities. And that revenue stream is slightly below budget. If you look at the last column here, 2.4 million in projected revenues. Actual collections is 2.1, and off about 16% of compared to what we collected last year. Private utility tax. This is the trend. The private utility tax is collected on cable TV, natural gas, electricity, and telephone service. And you can see that's we hit just about exactly what we budgeted. Looking at the trend, the private utility tax, you can see it was either decreasing or flat for several years. In the last 2 years, it's had about 7% growth year over year. Combined utility tax revenues works out to nearly 4.8 million. We collected nearly 4.5, so about 315,000 below our estimate, so about 6.5% less than what we budgeted. The actual collection's about 10% less than what we collected last year. This brings us down to REIT, real estate excise tax. So REIT is a major resource for us for public works projects. And again, some of the same trend information looking back to 2016. I also have a little bit of detailed information here. So one thing I want to point out before we get into the details here, the last few months of the year, you can see up until about August, September, we were either right about what we collected in the same period the prior year or slightly above. So that changed in September. We were at nearly 149,000 for the month last September. This year we're at 135,000. October we're at 120 versus 162. November 116 versus 160, and then December 63,000. So hopefully that trend does not continue, but that decreasing revenue stream is evident for the last several months in a row. So the section of the chart down here, this is what our cash balance is in the REIT reserves as of 12/31/23. So with the REIT 1 and REIT 2 combined is nearly 5 million. We had budgeted for 1.7 million in transfers, which would leave about 3.2 million. So those transfers are outlined in this section of the chart right here, the lower right-hand corner. We budgeted REIT 2 for overlays, sidewalks, and ADA improvements, and then REIT 1 for most of our parks work, including a re-roofing of Washington Park residence and shop, and then also budgeted 300,000 for facilities. And this will come into play a little bit later when I talk about the budget amendment.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
Thank you. Mr. Hoagland, I don't mean to interrupt your great presentation. As always, your detail is wonderful. But at some point, would you elaborate a little bit about the numbers, the collection, September, October, November, and December, what you might attribute that to at some point in your discussion?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
So we can drop down to that right now. The next chart. So the real estate excise tax is assessed on housing home sales when they are sold So the first time when a house is built, it generates sales tax for the city. When it's sold on the market, subsequent to that, it generates real estate excise tax. So we track, on this chart, we track the number of times that homes trade hands during the year. So looking at this, this top line here is the revenue collection. The second line is the number of home sales. So this is a house that's been sold, it changes ownership, they establish a new account, and that's how we identify that that sale has taken place with the new utility account. So you can see the last couple of years, it was pretty steady for 2016 through 2019, even 2020 at nearly 500 sales per year. So The last few years, it started to tail off a little bit, but particularly last year and this year, that activity, that real estate activity has just decreased. That last line here, the REIT per sale, so it's real estate excise tax generated per home sale. It's just a math calculation of the total amount collected and the number of sales. But you can see how that amount has jumped up starting really in, I guess, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And what that indicates is the average home sale price has increased. So the number of sales has been decreasing for a few years, but the home sales, or the home sale price, has been increasing. So our overall revenues haven't really decreased. Even looking at the collection this year, we're nearly 1.4 versus 1.5 last year. So it's not materially different, but it appears that there may be a trend in those home sales tapering off to the point now that it is affecting our our real estate excise tax revenue.
Thank you. You answered my question.
So this is what we have budgeted. Most of this activity has taken place during the year, but I haven't done any of those interfund transfers yet to move that cash from REIT to those funds, and that'll be coming up here in the next few weeks as we get into our year-end procedures. Lodging tax, I was intending to have a little more information for council by this point, so I apologize that I don't, but this is something I'm looking forward to working on more this year and making our accounting and reporting for the lodging tax receipts a little more robust and a little more clear on what has been set aside for capital versus what's left for operating. But this revenue stream has been increasing pretty nicely over the last several years, so we're just over $600,000 for collection for the year in 2023. Okay, so this gets us into this chart that I call the major funds chart. This has the illustration of the revenues, the budgeted revenues and expenditures versus actual revenues and expenditures. So this is looking at through December. Does not include, the budgeted numbers do not include what I am presenting to you tonight for consideration. So the general fund, and I also have cash balances identified. I don't have the operating cash balance identified for the general fund because there's still quite a number of year-end adjustments that I need to make that's going to affect that. So I didn't want to put a number out that I knew was going to be wrong, but I didn't really know how wrong. But that'll be coming. But the general fund, budget-wise, is in good shape. 36 million in budgeted expenditures versus 30.8 in actual expenditures. Parks and Rec Fund 101, just within budget with the ending cash balance 1.1 million. Cemetery Fund also within budget, ending cash balance 266,000. The library is well within budget, and also wanted to point out they are 20,000 to the good, so they have banked 20,000 in cash into their cash reserves for 2023. The Street Maintenance Fund, this is one you can see it's at 102% of the budget that was established, so it's over budget. This is one that I'll be asking for a budget amendment consideration a little later, and this is directly related to the overlay program. And there's really two components to the overlay program, and what we've reported on primarily in the past on how much overlay work we've done is how much the city has paid to contractors to do that overlay work. The last few years, the city has obtained a pay revert of its own and has been doing more work in-house. And so this year, the staff costs exceed budget by nearly $300,000, and that's a direct result of additional work that the staff have done on the overlay program within the city. When we start the budget process, all of the departments estimate what the staff are going to be spending their time on, and for the vast majority of staff, that's just one fund. It's library, it's parks, it's whatever. Engineering and streets, though, they spend a lot of time in the utilities as well. So street workers spend time not only on the streets themselves, but working in the storm utility, sewer utility, water utility. So those estimates are made during the beginning of the budget process, but once we get into the year and they start doing their work, they'll code their time to the job that they've been working on. So that's how those additional expenditures end up in the road maintenance fund, because of that work they're doing on the overlays that we're doing in-house. So it drove our budget a little bit over budget, but I think it's a nice story. It's a success story, because my understanding is they are able to do more with a dollar than we can when we're paying a contractor to do that same work. But we are limited on what we can do and how much we can do. But that's the story there.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. So does this reflect, you and I talked about this, but I want to make sure that I have this right. So even though it represents a greater expenditure in this department, this is staffing money that was going to be spent, but it wasn't going to show up here. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So the road staff, for example, that have their wages budgeted between road maintenance, storm, sewer, and water, once they actually do that work and those expenditures are made out of the road maintenance fund, then that is effectively cash unspent out of those other funds that are no longer available to fund that staff position. So we need to make that up through this amendment process.
Right, so it's not like there's all this additional money being spent. It's coming from a different place, so it's showing up here, so it looks like a greater impact than it really is. Essentially, it's not costing the city more money, even though it looks like it is right here, perhaps, to people.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly right. So
Okay.
there's when you see this budget amendment, I'll be requesting real estate excise tax to fund that additional spending out of the road maintenance fund, because there's a statute that prevents it states one fund cannot benefit at the expense of another, which means that once money goes into a fund like the storm drain fund, you can't take that money back out and put it into a different fund and spend it on, even though we'd be spending it on labor, it would be for a different purpose, so it's unallowable to move that money out.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Walters?
I appreciate your explanation, Mr. Hoagland, but I would reject your characterization of it as an entirely good news story. I think the good news story is that we're able to self-perform some of our work. I think going over budget is not a good news story. In this case, it's only 2%, and it's not a whole lot of hard dollars, but it is money that could be going to something else that we don't get to make that choice about because we've got to backfill this fund. So I just wanted to make clear that going over budget is almost never a good news story. But then you've got one later on the same slide. So Washington Park, I would say, going over budget there is quite a bit different and a good news story.
I think that's fair, yeah.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Fantini?
So I kind of just want to understand. So we made a change last year to stop using a contractor and to use our own folks here in order to perform that work. So is that what we're doing this year as well? And did we adjust the budget for 2024 so that we won't see this same type of shortage?
Yeah, thank you, that's a great question. So we didn't stop using the contract work. What we're trying to do is supplement what we're doing with contract work on the overlays, supplementing that with our own resources. And so this is, I spent a great deal of time so far in this young year so far talking with the Public Works Director about this. And we've talked about the way they're tracking time, the way we have tracked time in the past. So they are, Public Works, going to start scrutinizing their time even more and being more diligent about the way they track time. We don't really have a good system to go back and look at how the staff has spent their time. We use job cost codes so we can see how much time was spent on a particular project, but the staff have a general spread that's established in the budget, and then for certain projects, they'll track their time for that project. What they're starting to do now is to track all of their hours regardless of the project, whether it's a special project or just routine. They're still going to be tracking those. So at the end of the year, we'll have something we can look back on and have a really good estimation then of what to expect in the coming year. Different budgets in different years, different departments, we've tried doing time studies, which are depending on, like for engineering, for example, if we do a time study in February versus July, it's going to look much different on what they're working on. So this will really be the first time that, since I've been here, that we're trying to make an effort to really capture 100% of staff time to be able to then to make a really accurate projection for the coming year.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
Just one additional point, though, in lieu of the conversations we've had from council and also your responses have been wonderful. But the bottom line is that the reason we're doing as much of this in-house as we are is that it not only allows us to save money, which we're doing, but it also allows us to use that money more efficiently to be able to get the pieces and the things that we're doing right now. And I think probably the solution to that, as you work out those details, is that I honestly think that we need to talk just a little bit more about those savings and what does it mean, how much the work that we put in, it costs us this, but ordinarily this is what it would have cost us had we not done it in-house, which shows the community that not only are we saving money, but we're using those dollars as maximally as we can. And I think that that's the point that you were trying to make in this conversation. So I'm just saying, as a council member, I would love to hear whether that's from Andy, Ms. Rayum, or anyone, as we begin our conversations about costing, we also began to point out a little bit more pointedly how we're saving those dollars, because from what I understand, we are saving dollars when we're doing some good stuff. And when we don't, we've worked with Mount Vernon's road department and other things. So I just think that the public wants to hear that a little bit more, so we'll know that we're using those dollars effectively. Anything you wanted to add to that, Andy? I saw you waiting in the wing in the back.
Well, thank you. Well, while he's coming up there, obviously saving money is really important, and I think this is an opportunity where we can do it. But we've also heard from council many times, including myself, who voted on the ordinance that told us we have to spend at least $1.8 million in overlay. This is one of the ways that we can do overlays. It's not about what program it's in; it's about doing overlays, getting the work done. So I think this is one of those opportunities. So sometimes we're intentionally spending money. Mr. Rayam.
So I don't have any stats just on hand. I can tell you for sure overlaying in-house is extremely less expensive. Recently, council authorized us to buy a paver that has a hopper on it, so now we can actually, like a paving crew, pave. So even faster in the coming year. We are going to track that though, like Steve said, so that right now I think we're reporting on just what we contract out. And this coming year, with the information that we're going to have, we're doing a maintenance management software program that we've been using for a year, and I am, it's called the Andy 100% rule amongst the Public Works Department, where every last hour that they have here at work, even their vacation time that they're going to put in there, so we can tell quite specifically and quite completely what they spent their time on. So so we'll have some really good numbers at the end of the year to report out on the paving program, in addition to contracting out paving.
Awesome. All right. Still a lot more to go for Mr. Hoagland, I know, but these are all good questions.
Yeah. So street maintenance, you'll see that again on the ordinance coming up in a little bit. Street construction, we budgeted 6.6, we're at 2.5. That's primarily the ongoing R Avenue project. That'll conclude here in the next month or two. Washington Park, 125% of expenditure budget, but 152% of revenue budget. So a lot more activity out there, generating more cost, but more revenue as well. The Parks Capital project, or Parks Capital Fund, is also over budget by 2%, and that's due to the skate park. That's on the ordinance that you'll see shortly as well. This next fund, the 109 fund, I don't have a percentage here, but you can see it's quite a bit over budget, $791,000 versus a $695,000 budget. We had some cash in reserves when we started the year that goes back to the beginning of the program when we partnered with the Family Center and the Housing Authority. It took a little bit of time for those projects to get up and running. So once they were, then we're able to pass through all of that cash, and that's what that balance was from. It was just a carryover from the prior year. Fund 110 is the Ambulance Service Fund. As council is aware, we've now collapsed that fund back into the general fund, so the EMS fund is now just part of the fire department in the general fund.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
On Fund 108, we haven't actually gone negative there, have we?
Oh, yes. Thank you for pointing that out. Sorry. That is a negative cash balance, but none of the year-end transfers have been made. So there's a $100,000 REIT transfer that was budgeted. So once and that'll be retroactive back to 12/31. So once that is made, then that'll bring that back up to a positive balance.
Okay. I would note that so Parks Capital is over a little bit because of the skateboard park, 2%. Similarly, street maintenance is over 2%, but street maintenance is 2% is quite a bit larger than the 2% on the Parks Fund, and they'll be drawing from the same revenue source, REIT, to fill these gaps.
That's correct.
And eventually, we do run out of REIT, as you illustrated, with that diminishing supply there. So it does become, more and more important that we make, first of all, that we be able to make decisions at all about how we use REIT, and that ability is taken away from us when funds go over budget.
Yeah. So this part of the conversation is making me nervous about talking about the ordinance further in a few minutes, but we'll get there. Fund 113 is the ACFL fund, just within budget. Lodging tax is within budget as well, with a current balance of about $1.5 million in the lodging tax fund. REIT we talked about a little bit. We had the expenditure bucket is empty still. We haven't made any of those year-end transfers. I want to touch on the utilities just real briefly. The water fund, sewer, storm, and sanitation fund. So there's a lot going on here, but just as a reminder, this charges budget line right here, that's the budget that we established for charges for service. I like to track that monthly against what we've actually collected just to make sure something isn't really off there. So we collected about 2.5% more than what we budgeted, so pretty darn close. Our cash balances are all very healthy in the water fund. The 62% here, it's just a quick measurement I did of the operating cash balance versus the total revenue collected for the year, just as an overall kind of snapshot of what that balance looks like. Sewer fund, likewise, very healthy. When you look at the charges budget versus actuals, I'm off about 7%. I always forget about the winter average on that. So the winter average use, the calculation that's, sorry. City of Anacortes is one of the few, if not the only city that gives its citizens a break on the water that it expends on watering gardens, things of that nature. So we do that calculation in the wintertime. So in the summertime, when you're using more water, your sewer is actually capped at what your winter water use average is. So we still charge for all of the water that's used, but the sewer is capped at what that average is during the winter. And during this budget process, I forgot about that reduction, and that's why the budget is off a little bit from what was actually collected. The storm drain.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Before you go on to storm drain, if we scroll back up to water, how far through demolition of the old water treatment plant are we in terms of spending down our capital reserve?
Yeah, I believe we've expended $5 million so far on that project, and I believe the contract was for 10. So
sounds about right. Okay.
Storm drain fund is in good shape. 1.6 in operating cash and a small capital reserve. So what I really wanted to point out to council is the sanitation fund. You can see our revenue collection is about $6 million. We have cash on hand, not including the rainy day fund, of about $1.5 million, which is about 26%. That's not a terrible amount, but it's not a great amount. So the state auditors recently concluded their audit, and as part of the exit conference, they actually mentioned that they took note of a relatively low cash balance in the solid waste fund. We had a good discussion about that. That's something that I've been keeping an eye on for the last few years. It's been hovering around that 1.2 to 1.5 level. And it's not been a problem, but if we were to experience a significant increase in tipping rates or contractual fees, then it could potentially become something we'd have to take a closer look at. The equipment rental.
Mr. Walters.
We are going to get an increase in tipping fees this year. Do we know what that amount is yet?
I want to say there's a SWAC meeting on Wednesday that
Okay.
maybe more information will be forthcoming.
Because you had brought this to us on the finance committee last year sometime, and increasing our rates to match what we have to pay at the county transfer station should be a high priority, or we will fall farther behind. But I had understood we don't quite know what those rates are yet.
Yeah, we've heard rumors, but haven't heard anything solid yet.
Okay.
The equipment rental fund is about $8 million in capital cash, and that does not include the encumbrances that we've made for the interfund loans against that fund. The last thing I have here is, this is the chart I use to track capital projects. So on the left side of the chart shows the program description. The total cost under this column is what we had budgeted, and then the columns running across to the right are the different revenue sources that we've used to fund these projects or to budget these projects. On the far, and then total funding over here, generally there's just one revenue stream, but for example, the R Avenue project, there were a couple different revenue streams. So this shows the total funding, and then this far right column is the actual expense, and this is as of through the end of period 12, the end of December. This actual expense up here, this very top program is the overlay program. This $2,483,000, that's a combination of what we paid to the contractor for overlays and the additional wages expense that I talked about earlier above what the original budget was. This 32nd and M, I have this in red just because it wasn't in the original budget. It was some carryover work, but this was all fully reimbursable by the grant for that program. The 1.4 down here, 1.489, that's actual expenses at the skate park at this point. And facilities, CFP projects, 809,000 actuals against a 377,000 budget. So is the part that I was not looking forward to, but we'll get into here next if there are no other questions by council. So a lot of the requested budget amendment is pretty routine. I'll try to go through this quickly. The first one is for the police department. It's a virtual reality training system. They received a donation, or they have donations that they would like to use for that. So that's why I'm asking for a budget amendment here so we can free up that restricted money to use to pay for this program.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Walters.
have we already accepted that donation by ordinance?
Yeah, so it's actually, those donations are, those are ongoing donations that come into the police department that we set aside as part of our monthly accounting.
Oh, so this wasn't a $90,000 donation. It was a smaller allowed donation of less than $10,000.
Correct. Yeah.
Times 9 or more. Okay.
Yes, exactly. This next one is the museum and a similar situation. This is the program for redecking the W.T. Preston ran a little over budget, so some museum donations in the same manner would be used to cover that excess. So this 001713, this is the facilities area. So the professional services bars number, the professional services category in facilities was initially budgeted at $77,000, and the repairs and maintenance was originally budgeted at $300,000. Both of those bars numbers have gone over by the amount listed here, 245 and 187. So what I'm requesting is a budget amendment to be funded with REIT for these, with the understanding that I have not yet had the ability to do a reconciliation of those charges. So I did a spot check this weekend. I went through and looked, and I know at least some portion of those will be charged back to the utilities. In other words, there was some work that facilities did on behalf of the utilities that got charged to this general fund bars number, but are rightly allocable back to the utilities. So I'll go through, do a reconciliation, identify those, do a journal entry to move those expenditures out of the general fund and back to those utilities where they rightly belong. However, I don't know what that amount is at this point. I
Mayor
do
Miller?
know that
Mr. Walters.
You correctly identified this as an area where I have some concern. 432,000 from REIT is certainly 432,000 that we could spend on on finishing the skate park, that we could spend on the overlay program, that we could spend on a number of other things. You have a guess as to how much of that total can be allocated to the utilities?
So I know that part of this is the Washington Park re-roofing project, and I think that came in, I want to say 113,000. So that initially was identified to be spent out of the parks construction program, and that was budgeted to be paid for with REIT. So that's part of this. To your question, the amount allocable back to the utilities, it would be, I'm certain, less than 100,000. It might be more in the, it might be less than 50,000. As I mentioned, I just did a spot check, so I don't have a good answer for that.
So, but facilities went over budget here by 432,000. And you think that maybe 100,000 of that can be dealt with through recoding of these expenses? Is that, am I summarizing that accurately?
Yeah, and I'm thinking that's probably that would be the high end.
Right. Okay. I wish to express my displeasure at that. I mean, 332,000 seems to me to be, it covers entirely the overage of the skate park, which is one thing that we went into with our eyes open, right? Because we knew how much money we had for that.
Yeah,
and this
quite
is a
right.
limited resource
Yes.
REIT.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'm apologizing ahead of time. This is going to sound like an excuse, but we have had significant staff changes in that position, and myself have effectively not monitored what's been going on due to my issues for the entire fourth quarter of.
But is that a coding issue, or is it?
Well, so I spoke with the interim manager this morning about that, about the utilities, and he understands what we're looking for in that area, and so it's I don't know that was really evident to the staff that got put in place pretty abruptly to fill those positions. I don't know that process was clear.
Okay. Last question. Do you need this fourth quarter budget amendment tonight before you have had the opportunity to figure, maybe not the rest of it, but this line in it?
Yeah.
Do you need that tonight
No,
before you've had the ability to figure out for sure?
No,
how
that's a
they might
fair
be recoded?
question. Yeah. In fact, I left the date blank on the ordinance if one use first read tonight and then come back next week, and I could make some progress on that during the week on that reconciliation. Part of it, as I said, the 113 for the Washington Park re-roofing project, I think that's, if that was approved through the budget process, I don't think that's a controversial one, but some of these other ones do need to be scrutinized a little more. And we had multiple challenges in the facilities department that required us to bring on some additional custodial contract work as well, and I think that's coded in these same bars number. So there's a number of things going on there that need to get looked at.
Yeah, I'm not sure the news is going to get better in a week, but it can become more detailed for council.
Right.
Which, Mayor Miller?
Yep.
Which I think would be a worthwhile exercise, just from the perspective of accountability here, that it could very well be that there are reasonable explanations in that detailed analysis, which would be reassuring.
Mm-hmm.
Member Miller.
Mr. Young.
No, to Mr. Walter's point, I mean, he makes a great point, but also I wanted to acknowledge to, the public that I think for many of us, I can speak for myself, it has been a challenging year, in my own personal life, but also in all of the things that's taken place by way of city and city businesses, staffing changes, moves. It is the pea under the cup. But the good news is that we have an incredible team, I believe, and I think we have a wonderful council. And I think that to that point of being able to come back with some additional information, because I know it's been a challenge for you as well, in the midst of everything else. And I'm saying that deliberately And I'm also saying that pointedly because I think that I wanted it to be clear that the work is being done and that these details that you're asking and that you're speaking to, the details will be forthcoming that we're looking for, but it was just at the point of this presentation, things are still coming in that you needed to work on. So I just wanted to assure the public that, you know, it's been a lot. You know, last year was a whole lot. And, but I will tell you that we're here and we're working on your behalf. And so, Mr. Hoagland, I look forward to a deeper explanation of it. I know it's forthcoming. And just wanted to kind of put that out there. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Fantini.
So I just have a question. Budget amendment is something that I'm assuming we do every year, that you'll come to us with changes and things that are off and unbalanced. Is this quite a bit higher than what we've seen in previous years, or is that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So going back to the beginning of the budget process, facilities actually requested $600,000 in that category for those repairs, maintenance, actually just repairs and maintenance. And so that during that budget process, that number was cut down to $300,000, and they put together a more detailed, probably may remember that from sitting in on some of those budget meetings while they were going on here, more detailed proposals for 2024. But again, that $113,000 re-roofing project, that's the biggest single item that's in there. So when you pull that out, we're looking at a different number, but it's in some ways, I guess, hard to, that number itself, 432,000, and that's a big number. Take the 113 out, it's a little smaller. If the budget was left at the 600,000 that was originally requested, we'd be 100,000 under budget.
We'll get those details, and it'll help us frame a better idea as we budget facilities maintenance in the future. All right, but there's probably more you want to go on for in case there's some more.
Yeah. So next item, this is Fund 104. This is the street maintenance fund. So this 100,000 in additional budget, we talked about the budget overage from the additional work that was done in that fund. Fund 107 is the Washington Park Fund. So a busier year, more staff, more supplies. I will point out the operating supplies here of 30,000. There was also a new machine that was purchased for the park to accept cash for people that are paying for their camping stays. But all of these costs are offset by the additional revenues that were collected out there. And they'll still put additional revenue into cash reserves at the end of the year. Fund 108's the Parks Capital Fund, the skate park we talked about. And we would just...
Mr. Walters.
Two questions here. First of all, on 104, the report that you showed us earlier doesn't show 104 as being 100,000 over budget. It's somewhat less than that. So will we be putting 100,000 into that fund by approval of this? Or will you only transfer what is necessary to make up the remaining amount?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I would not be transferring the entire balance, just what we needed.
Okay.
So,
and then on the skate park cost more than 33,000, more than we'd expected, right?
Right.
So assumedly, we're digging into the remainder of the budget or the fund balance for this for the 108 fund.
right. So looking at the fund overall, it's 34,000 over budget. And once that $100,000 cash transfer we were talking about earlier is made, that current negative cash balance goes to 60,000, and then there's sufficient resources to cover this requested budget amendment. So I know that Parks is continuing with fundraising efforts in conjunction with, their partners with the skate park. So I didn't really feel like there was a need to bring additional or significantly more revenue into that fund when there was these ongoing efforts related to the skate park. And the Fund 108 does have its own revenue source. It does collect the revenues that are collected from the tower on Mount Erie go into that fund. So there is some wiggle room there.
But do we expect that that fund will more or less be zeroed out? If we put this 30 in, but it has a negative 40,
Yeah.
will there be any cash left in this, real amounts of cash left in this fund?
Yeah, so that negative 40, that's the cash balance, that's an actual cash balance now after the year-end activity. So this is just getting the budget caught up. So that 60,000 positive figure will still be in place there for the Parks Fund, if that makes sense. So the accounting has already been done. It's just the budget, getting the budget up to speed. Feel like that didn't answer the question.
I'll follow up with you more offline about that one.
Fund 109, that is the affordable housing sales tax that gets passed through, we talked about earlier. Fund 445, that's the storm drain fund. So a couple of these items in 445 and then also in 450, which is the solid waste fund. This was actually an error that occurred in the OpenGov budget development. There were just a few bars numbers that just didn't get created. So when we went through, filled out the budget, it was the tax bars number was not there, and it was just an oversight that didn't jump out at me. Once we got into the monthly accounting and needed to make those utility tax payments from the fund to the general fund, it became evident and then we created the bars number, and so this is just some housekeeping to get the budget up to speed with the utility tax that's been collected and forwarded to the general fund. 450 solid waste fund, exactly the same thing happened with both insurance and taxes. The third line here, utility services, there's been some turnover in the operations department, and that budget responsibility has changed hands now. So this ended up being the budget that was there was just not updated for 2023. So this is just getting that budget caught up. I'd point out the solid waste services. That's the revenue stream that will be used to offset that, and there was more than sufficient revenues to offset that. The solid waste fund actually this year, I think, banked about $300,000 into cash reserves. So it had, from a fiscal standpoint, it had a good year, a successful year. So there's not a cash flow or revenue issue. It's just the budgeting and accounting. So I'd be happy to answer other questions.
Other questions for Mr. Hoagland? Any members of the public would like to dive in on this one? Comments? Okay, I think we've got enough from council what we need to correct or try to get the info, and I would encourage any questions for Mr. Hoagland or myself offline. Would appreciate it. And
Okay.
we'll look to bring I think we can bring this back next week.
Yep, I'll be back in a week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are on to item 6B. This is ordinance 4069. It's a parking code amendment. This is a discussion item with possible action. And Mr. Rayum is going to present this one.
Well, let me bring up our the map here. There we go. Okay, Mayor, Council, good evening. This is the agenda item for parking code amendments. City Council updated AMC 10.12 on July 24th, 2023. The code changes included parking regulations. On November 20th, 2023, City Council received recommendations from the Public Works Committee / Road Safety Committee to address requests for various safety parking code amendments. At that time, City Council agreed with the committee recommendation and directed staff to bring forward an ordinance amending Municipal Code Title 10.12. The ordinance before you tonight addresses the changes City Council requested, which were changes to trailer parking around Washington Park. This is this map I have up on the screen here. The kind of black highlighted ones were the streets which we were going to add to the code. This was because Washington Park has plenty of trailer parking. It's just free to park in the neighborhood instead, so people have been parking out here, and now we are going to post it and make it enforced that people go ahead and do not park in the residential neighborhood. I understand this protocol for the council to have 2 readings of a code amendment, so we do have a schedule for next week, so you can have a second reading, or you could suspend your rules and just pass it tonight if you wish. It's totally up to you. And that is my presentation.
All right, pretty straightforward. Any members of the public wish to comment on this? They're here tonight. Council, it's your pleasure.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
We've talked about this at length at the Public Works Committee and even here at Council. Does this need to be 2 separate motions? One to suspend the 2-read rule, so I move to suspend the 2-read rule.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Moulton and a second by Mr. Fantini to suspend the 2-read rule with regards to the ordinance 4069. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, would you take the vote?
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, now ordinance 4069.
Mayor
Mayor
Miller?
Miller.
Ms. Moulton,
I move to approve ordinance 4069 as presented.
Second.
okay, a motion by Ms. Moulton and a second by Mr. Fantini. Any additional discussion?
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
I propose 2 amendments to that. First of all, the first section, which reads, "The Anacortes Municipal Code is amended as follows," should be followed by Table 10.12.385-1 is amended as follows, because it says should be amended, but we are actually doing the amending, and it's Table 10.12.385-1. The section number doesn't have a hyphen 1. The other amendment is Storm Place is Strom Place on the map. So I think Strom is right. Strom is right. The Ward 3 rep says Strom is right. So I would change that too. So I would just ask, if there's no objection, unanimous consent to incorporate those 2 amendments.
And I think I see that unanimous consent. So the motion by Ms. Moulton and a second by Mr. Fantini to approve 4069 with those amendments. Mr. Franciac, please.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. Fantini,
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you for catching that. And we're on to item 6C. This is Resolution 3148, rejecting all bids for the AMI monopoles and antennas installation. Mr. Rayam.
Thank you, Mayor. Oddly enough, this was on November 20th. The City Council, the same night that we talked about the parking code changes. But City Council approved entering into a contract with the Vicar in the amount of $281,313 to to install a monopole that would have an AMI antenna on it, an automated metering infrastructure antenna on it, so we can communicate with the water meters. And the contract needed to be amended because it needed a light on it, so the airplanes, it would notify airplanes the pole was there, so they didn't hit it. That kind of spurred us into having to go actually back out because it changed the contract enough it needed to go back out, so we did. We got 2 bids back. One of them was not complete. The other bid was, and I was trying to find the number before I got up here tonight, was $534,000. So that's a almost $300,000 increase from about a month earlier. The engineering estimate was about $400,000. So due to the pretty intense cost increase, the Public Works Department started thinking, well, why don't we just attach that antenna to our water tower and see how it goes. The pole is going to be much higher than our water tower, so it probably would have had better coverage. Under the circumstances and what's happening to us in the bidding process, we recommend rejecting all bids, and we will install it with staff in-house on our water tower instead.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
I guess what I'm trying to reconcile is the mushrooming of cost associated with it. Is it just the way of the times that, people see an opportunity and it goes up that much?
I don't want to. I don't know for sure what kind of transpired between the 2 bids.
Right.
I don't want to badmouth any companies on,
Well, no,
on recording, but I would
understand.
say we'd be better off just sticking on the water tower at this point.
I totally agree with you with the action, agree with the action that's being proposed here tonight. I do. But I'm always fascinated how when there is a negotiated amount and then a minor tweak of that can somehow almost double or, a third more is a lot of money. And I'm always curious as to the thought processes. And I know it's a pontification. It's subjective thought, but, for me, that's huge. And I was just curious. So, okay. With that, unless there's some other questions for anybody else, I just wanted to put that out there. I move that the resolution 3148 be adopted to reject all bids for the AMI monopoles and antennas installation project 21-137-WTR-002 pursuant to RCW 35.23.352.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. Walters to approve Resolution 3148. Any additional discussion?
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
A couple of follow-up questions. We received a permit from Skagit County for the original tower that was being contemplated, right?
I believe so, yes.
Do you happen to know how we ended up with this new FAA requirement for the light? Was someone from the FAA reviewing all the permits that Skagit County was issuing and noticed that? Or how exactly did that happen?
So I wasn't privy to the details. I just know that we needed to put a light on it. And that changed what we had in the contract originally enough that we had to go back out to bid.
Was there an additional condition placed on the permit by the county after they issued the permit? Do you happen to know that part?
I don't know that part.
Okay, I'd be very interested in
We can dig into
in
the
knowing
county
if
interaction.
that happened, because that, among other things, is not legal. But do you think that the new approach of putting it on the water tower is going to be very less expensive?
Oh, it's a lot less expensive. Yeah, we're talking just the equipment costs. We already funded our staff so that they are going to install it on that tower to see what the coverage is. The height that we originally had was designated by, they modeled it out, the AMI, the company that we use, and they said, well, it needs to be about this high to get all of the meters that you want to reach with that antenna. And so there's a likelihood that we won't reach all of them, but we can we can deal with that. We can go out and we can collect that data with other instruments.
And is placing the antenna on the water tower instead of it being freestanding, is that allowed under the permit?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a little, it's not sticking out, protruding up too high above the water tower. We're thinking about making it into a Christmas tree shape, and then we can take it. Just kidding.
Okay, any additional discussion?
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Moulton?
are there additional towers we need? I've sort of lost track. Are there 3 total, 1 on City Hall, this one, and where's the third
The other
one?
one's like the southeast part of the island, kind of where we acquired from Sketchup PUD. That's the other one that we're looking at building,
Okay,
constructing.
so that's forthcoming?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. Walters to approve Resolution 3148. Mr. Franciac?
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, on to item 6D, Resolution 3147, requesting ballot initiative to create a Metropolitan Park District. This is an action item. Ms. Swetnam will be presenting.
Thanks, Mayor Miller, members of council, members of the audience. So this is basically a readoption of a resolution that was adopted by council in November of 2023. This resolution would place an item on an upcoming special election ballot to create a Metropolitan Park District, which would be the kind of take over the Fidalgo Rec District that currently exists and owns the Fidalgo Pool and Fitness Center. So council adopted the resolution asking the county to place that item on an upcoming election. County representatives reviewed the ballot proposition language and requested that some changes be made. So it was important that the city's language and the county's language match up. So we said, let's take it back to council and make sure that there's approval for the updated language. So the changes from the resolution 3137 to this one are fairly minimal, but there is a reference to the specific resolutions that were adopted by both the city and the county in the ballot proposition, which the council for the county felt was an important change. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have. We are also joined by Commissioner McNett, in case there are any questions for the district as well. Staff recommends
Mayor
approval.
Miller?
Mr. Walters?
Is that it? Is that all that, is that why we have to redo this? Because they wanted the numbers added?
Yes. There were a couple other language changes that were made to the recitals. There was some question about whether it was a limited Metropolitan Parks District or full Metropolitan Parks District. Ultimately, that was up to the district, who felt that a Metropolitan District gave them the flexibility to be able to grow into future plans. But the key thing that required change was making sure that the ballot proposition language was identical in both resolutions. So,
Sure. And I note that the statute refers to it as a Metropolitan Park District, right? But
correct.
the resolution is, or I assumedly the promoters of the district are wanting to call it a Metropolitan Recreation District. Any heartburn over that?
I don't have heartburn over that.
Okay. It, in my mind, might create a little bit of confusion. Maybe it was intended to clarify and narrow the responsibilities of the district, but the ballot language says Metropolitan Park District, then it says it would create the Fidalgo Metropolitan Recreation District, then it says it would be governed, or it says for the formation of a Metropolitan Park District, so it says all those things, both of those things.
Well, I think
several times.
I think the legal status is as a Metropolitan Park District, and I think there was some concern about calling it a park district implies that there's a park when in fact there is no park, and so the official title of the district is a recreation district. Jeremy, jump in and stop me if I got that wrong. So
would it be wrong to call it a pool district? Okay.
I
Yeah,
think
I mean,
that
it seems clear that the legal thing is a metropolitan park district, but then
Correct.
it introduces these other terms, which I think might be confusing. But
Certainly, the city's objective is to provide the language that will be acceptable to the county commissioners.
there were a number of folks at the table putting language together that for various reasons were important to the respective organizations. And I think that part of the recreation reference, from what I understand, and I'm certainly not trying to represent the district, but was that there might be a future where it is not just a pool, but there might be additional facilities that could be a part of that district. Not that there was any sort of specific plan, but again, I think the kind of policy that was articulated to me was to allow some flexibility and growth for that district in the future.
Any other questions? And thank you, Commissioner McNabb, for being here. Any other questions?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
So one of the other things that was in the original resolution for the ballot language was, if approved, the new district would replace the existing Fidalgo Parks and Recreation District. So do I assume that council for the county objected to including that line? Because I thought that that was a useful line.
No, I think what council for the county said was that there needed to be a kind of a separate action that accomplished that, and that would be something that happens with the district itself.
And it's not possible to promise that in the ballot measure text?
I don't know that that was the thought, and that's all the insight that I have on that change.
Okay. Well, that's something that will have to be articulated to the voters separately then.
All right, well, hopefully we'll get the language that will work this time.
And let me just add that another minor change that was added was some allowance to be able to make minor changes to the language of the ballot initiative. You'll notice that there's a blank in there right now for the resolution number for the county. We added some delegation of authority so that staff could make changes to the language once we get that resolution number. So.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
I move approval of the resolution as presented.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Mr. Fantini to approve Resolution 3147. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac?
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. Fantini?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, and we hope to not bring this back before City Council again. But being no further business before the council, I will adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you.